Would you bet your life on a broken radio, if it were your only chance to alert the Allies? A German pilot scoffed, tossed $200 on the table and said, "That radio is dead." But what he didn't expect was that a silent widower, carrying the pain of a wife lost to the bombings, would turn an old umbrella into an antenna and set hell ablaze beneath the skies of the Luftwaffe. This story is real, and what happens next will shatter your perception of war. In the brutal spring of 1944, deep within occupied France, a German Luftwaffe pilot made such a bet. He was a man of leisure, of privilege, and a gambler by nature, with a disdain for anything he considered beneath him, especially the defeated civilians forced to labor under his command. He scoffed at the idea that a piece of abandoned junk could possibly hold any value. He had no idea he was playing a game with stakes far beyond his comprehension, against an opponent he hadn't even noticed. The year was 1944. The Allied forces were pushing, inch by agonizing inch, across Europe. Yet in the quiet, war-torn corners of France, the grip of the Third Reich remained ironclad. One such corner was a dusty, windswept airfield, a temporary German outpost carved into the French countryside. It was a place of constant tension, a hub of activity where the roar of engines mingled with the hushed fear of the local populace. Every day brought new rumors, new anxieties, new demands from the occupying forces. And every day the local villagers, stripped of their dignity and forced into labor, moved through the base, their eyes downcast, their spirits seemingly broken. Among the German ranks was Hauptmann Klaus Richter, a pilot of exceptional skill and even more exceptional arrogance. He carried himself with the swagger of a man who believed himself untouchable, a product of a regime that promised him dominion. Richter loved to gamble. Cards, dice, the lives of men in aerial dogfights. It all fueled his insatiable need for risk. He viewed the French civilians with utter contempt, seeing them as little more than drones, incapable of true resistance, certainly incapable of outsmarting a man of his caliber. One afternoon, while inspecting a recently requisitioned farm warehouse, Richter stumbled upon an old dust-covered radio. It was a relic, a bulky, archaic piece of equipment from a bygone era, abandoned and forgotten. A junior engineer, eager to impress, suggested they test it. "Perhaps it could be repurposed, Hauptmann," he offered, his voice tinged with a desperate hope for utility. Richter merely sneered, a dismissive wave of his hand sweeping through the stale air. "That ancient junk? It's probably been dead for a decade. I'll bet you $200, American dollars mind you, that it's utterly useless." $200 was a fortune, a sum that could feed a family for months in those desperate times. The engineer, crestfallen, knew he could not take such a risk. The radio was left in the warehouse, a silent, mocking testament to its supposed obsolescence. Civilians, including a quiet, unassuming man named Henri Dubois, were brought in to clean the facility. Henri was a widower, his face etched with a silent grief that he carried like a shroud. He moved with a practiced slowness. His eyes, however, missed nothing. He observed the German officers, their movements, their conversations, and most importantly, their equipment. He watched Richter, whose taunts echoed through the cavernous space. "Look at them," Richter would sneer to his subordinates, gesturing towards the laborers. "Pathetic, aren't they? They think they can resist. They can barely clean a floor." The words were like daggers, but Henri remained impassive, his gaze fixed on the silent radio. The radio appeared truly dead. Its dials were frozen. Its speakers emitted only a profound, unsettling silence. No crackle, no hum, no flicker of life. To anyone else, it was nothing more than a bulky paperweight, destined for the scrap heap. But Henri, a former radio technician before the war stole his peace, saw something else. He saw potential. He saw a challenge. Without a word, without drawing any attention, his hands began to work. He started collecting discarded wires, stray metal scraps he found amidst the rubble, and then a peculiar item, an old rusty umbrella, its fabric torn, its metal ribs exposed like a skeleton. He moved like a shadow, his movements economical, deliberate and utterly invisible to the Germans, who saw only a broken man. The pilot, oblivious to the silent rebellion unfolding beneath his very nose, remained convinced of his superiority. He walked past the radio again, kicking lightly at its wooden casing. "If this junk works," he declared, his voice booming with false bravado, I'll personally deliver it to London myself." He laughed, a harsh, grating sound that bounced off the warehouse walls. The joke was on the French, on the useless equipment, on the very idea of resistance. He had no idea his words were a prophecy, a dark promise that would soon come back to haunt him. He also had no idea that the quiet man with the umbrella was already listening, already planning, already connecting the pieces of a desperate, audacious gamble. The silence of the radio was about to be shattered. The silence of the radio was about to be shattered. Henri Dubois was no mere farmer, no simple laborer. Before the war had torn his world apart, before the German boots had marched through his village, he was a radio technician, a master of frequencies, a wizard with circuits. His hands had once brought distant voices across the airwaves for the sheer joy of connection. Now his skills were a secret, a dangerous weapon hidden beneath the guise of a broken man. Every day he walked with the weight of unspeakable loss. Months earlier, a German bombing raid, a sudden, deafening roar in the night, had ripped his wife from his life. He remembered the smell of burning wood, the dust in his throat, the terrifying silence that followed the explosion. All that remained was his young daughter, a fragile beacon in a world consumed by darkness, and a burning, silent resolve for vengeance. He moved through the warehouse, a ghost among the living, his eyes constantly scanning, assessing. The discarded wires, the metal scraps, they were not trash to him. They were components, each piece a potential bridge between silence and sound, between despair and defiance. And then the umbrella, a rusted skeletal frame, its fabric long gone, a forgotten casualty of some forgotten storm. To Richter it was junk. To Henri it was a lattice, a framework, the perfect structure for an improvised antenna. Each night, under the cloak of darkness, while the German soldiers celebrated their fleeting victories in distant quarters, Henri worked. His hands, calloused from farm labor, rediscovered their old precision. He stripped insulation from wires, twisted copper strands into makeshift coils, and meticulously wove them through the umbrella's ribs. It was a silent act of rebellion, a prayer whispered in metal and wire. He built it in pieces, hiding each component, assembling only when absolutely certain he was alone. The Germans, blinded by their arrogance, saw only a quiet, compliant civilian. They never imagined the depth of his grief, the sharpness of his mind, or the audacity of his plan. One evening, as the shadows stretched long across the airfield, Henri overheard fragments of a conversation. German officers, their voices low but distinct, spoke of a major tank movement. North, Route 17, 4 a.m. His heart pounded like a drum against his ribs. This wasn't just another rumor. This was critical intelligence, a window into the enemy's next move. It was a chance, perhaps the only chance, to strike back. That night the warehouse felt colder, heavier. The air crackled with a different kind of tension. Henri waited until the last German guard had completed his rounds, until the only sound was the distant murmur of the wind. Then he moved. He retrieved the dead radio, its wooden casing cold beneath his touch. He carefully connected the makeshift antenna, the umbrella now a silent sentinel reaching towards the heavens. His breath hitched. He closed his eyes, remembering the feel of the old equipment, the precise turn of the tuning dial. He knew this radio wasn't broken. It was merely out of tune, a sleeping giant waiting for the right touch. He turned the dial slowly, methodically. Static. A whisper at first, then a hiss. Not silence, but possibility, a flicker of hope in the vast darkness. He adjusted the frequency, inch by agonizing inch, searching the airwaves for any sign of life, any hint of an Allied presence. Then a faint signal, weak, almost imperceptible, but undeniably there, a distant Allied voice, a beacon across the English Channel. It was a miracle. Or perhaps simply the culmination of desperate ingenuity. Suddenly, a small, soft voice pierced the silence. Papa, his daughter, wide-eyed and fearful, stood in the doorway, a tiny shadow against the moonlight. "Will they kill us if they catch us?" Her question, so innocent yet so profound, echoed the terror that lived in every occupied heart. Henri looked at her, his only remaining light, and knew he could not falter. He pulled her close, his voice a low, steady rumble. "Sometimes, my little one," he whispered, "the biggest risk is not trying at all. Sometimes you must try, even when the odds are impossible. He held her for a moment longer, drawing strength from her fragile presence. With the map spread before him, illuminated by the dim glow of a hidden lantern, and the radio now humming with a faint, hopeful static, Henry prepared for the impossible task. He had the intelligence, he had the means, and he had the motivation. The German celebration in the distant barracks provided a brief window of distraction, a moment of careless revelry that Henry intended to exploit. He took a deep breath, his fingers hovering over the Morse key. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about turning the tide, about making the arrogant pilot's joke a grim reality. He began to transmit. Each tap of the key was a heartbeat, a desperate plea sent into the night. Enemy column departs 04A via Route 17 northwest. He used old military radio protocols, a coded language he'd learned decades ago, now resurrected for a moment of profound urgency. He sent coordinates, disguised as innocuous numbers, each pulse of the signal a silent prayer. In England, miles away, an Allied radio operator, weary from hours of static and false alarms, heard a faint, almost ghostly signal. He almost dismissed it as interference, another phantom in the night. But then the message, clear, concise, a chilling detail that defied the signal's weakness. The transmission lasted only 11 seconds, a fleeting moment, a breath held in the darkness, just long enough to deliver its deadly payload, short enough to evade immediate detection. Henry disconnected the umbrella, carefully disassembling his improvised antenna, returning the warehouse to its deceptive silence. But the German pilot, Klaus Richter, a man whose sleep was often disturbed by the sounds of war, stirred. A loose cable, dislodged by Henry's hurried movements, fell with a soft thud. Richter's eyes snapped open. He scanned the darkened warehouse, a prickle of unease crawling up his spine. He saw the old tattered umbrella now resting innocently in a corner, but something about it felt wrong. A piece of its metal frame seemed to gleam in the faint moonlight, almost too perfectly positioned. A sudden, cold realization began to dawn on him. He sensed he had been outsmarted, but by whom? And what exactly had just happened? The silence, he knew, was now a lie. Miles away, across the choppy expanse of the English Channel, the weary Allied radio operator, who had almost dismissed the faint signal, now stared at his transcription with a growing sense of dread and disbelief. The message was too precise, too critical to ignore. Enemy column departs 04N0 via Route 17, northwest. The coordinates, once just numbers, now painted a clear picture of an imminent German offensive. He alerted his superiors. Within minutes, the sleepy night in England erupted into a controlled frenzy. Orders were barked, maps were unfurled, and squadrons of Allied fighter bombers already on standby were scrambling. Their mission: intercept a German tank column that intelligence said wouldn't move for hours. But this new phantom transmission spoke of an immediate threat, a deadly spearhead aimed at Allied lines. Back at the German airfield, the commander was jolted awake by an urgent, frantic call. "Sir, immediate alert, Allied planes inbound, targeting a column on Route 17. The commander, groggy with sleep, stumbled to his feet. "Impossible. That column isn't due to move for hours." But the voice on the other end was insistent, laced with panic. "They're already there, sir. Ahead of schedule." The German tank column, a formidable force of steel and fire, had just begun its lumbering advance, a seemingly unstoppable tide of destruction rolling through the pre-dawn darkness. They were confident, undetected, following a meticulously planned route. They had no idea they were driving straight into a trap, a perfect ambush meticulously orchestrated by a ghost. Suddenly the night sky tore open, not with the anticipated roar of their own engines, but with the screaming descent of Allied warplanes. Explosions ripped through the column, turning the darkness into a blinding, fiery inferno. Tanks erupted, their metal hulls twisting into grotesque sculptures of death. Soldiers scattered, their shouts of confusion quickly drowned out by the thunderous detonations. The entire movement, designed to be a decisive strike, was obliterated before it could truly begin. It was a massacre, a complete and utter annihilation. From the airfield, Hauptmann Richter watched, horrified, as the northern horizon pulsed with an apocalyptic light. Each flash was an echo of his own men's demise, a testament to a catastrophic intelligence leak. The ground beneath him trembled with the distant concussions. It wasn't just a column, it was their column, the one he had heard whispers about, the one that was supposed to spearhead their next offensive. He saw the burning wreckage, a fiery testament to the lie he had just sensed. His bet, his arrogant certainty, had just cost them everything. He had joked about delivering a working radio to London. Now the Allies had delivered a devastating blow to his own forces, thanks to a message sent from right under his nose. The airfield, once a hub of German confidence, transformed into a cauldron of paranoia and rage. The commander, his face a mask of fury, stormed through the ranks. Who? Who leaked this information? There was no communication, no warning. Interrogations began immediately, brutal and relentless. Every civilian laborer, every German soldier was a suspect. Henri Dubois, the quiet widower, blended seamlessly into the terrified crowd, his face impassive, his eyes betraying nothing. He was just another frightened Frenchman, caught in the crossfire of German suspicion. He had played his part perfectly, but children, in their innocence, are often the undoing of the most carefully laid plans. Later that day, as soldiers rummaged through the warehouse, searching for any clue, any sign of a transmitter, Henri's daughter, unable to contain her childish wonder, pointed to the now discarded, mangled umbrella. "Papa," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Look, the umbrella. You made the radio work with the umbrella." A soldier, overhearing the innocent remark, paused. An umbrella. He looked at the mangled frame, then at the dead radio. He saw the faint, almost invisible scorch marks on the metal ribs, the tiny, stripped wires still clinging to the frame. He followed the wires, tracing them back to where they had been subtly, expertly connected to the old radio's internal circuits. It wasn't just a broken umbrella, it was an antenna that had just sent a message that decimated an entire tank division. Hauptmann Richter, still reeling from the devastating ambush, was nearby. He saw the soldier's discovery, the wires, the umbrella. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The falling cable in the night, the perfectly placed umbrella, the silent, broken man who had cleaned the warehouse. "That man," he muttered, his voice raw with disbelief. "He tricked us all." His arrogance had blinded him. His contempt for the pathetic civilians had cost him a fortune, and now the lives of his comrades. The commander, his face contorted with rage, ordered Henri's immediate execution. "Find him, bring him to me, he will pay for this treachery." But then a chilling thought stopped him. "No, wait, we need to know who he sent the message to. Who is listening? Who is the contact?" The execution was delayed, replaced by a more terrifying prospect: forced extraction of information. The next morning, Allied planes soared over the village, not with bombs, but with a different kind of payload. Thousands of leaflets fluttered down, blanketing the fields and rooftops. German soldiers, bewildered, picked them up. On each leaflet, in bold, unmistakable letters, was a simple message: "We thank the invisible transmitter." The message spread like wildfire through the base, igniting a fresh wave of terror and distrust. The enemy knew. They knew they had an inside man. The German base descended into utter chaos. Paranoia festered like a wound. Officers suspected officers. Soldiers suspected civilians. Internal arrests began, swift and brutal. Every shadow seemed to hide a saboteur, every whisper a coded message. No one was safe. The once disciplined ranks fractured under the weight of their own fear. An officer, his face pale with shock, approached Richter. "Hauptmann, about your bet with the radio. It seems it wasn't so useless after all." Richter, his eyes hollow, stared at the burning horizon, the distant smoke still curling into the sky. He dropped his gaze to the ground, a defeated man. "That man?" he repeated, his voice barely a whisper. "He tricked us all. He played us for fools." The $200 he had wagered seemed meaningless now, a cruel joke in the face of such a devastating loss. The commander, realizing the imminent danger of their compromised position, ordered an immediate evacuation. Their base was no longer secure, their secrets were no longer safe, but it was too late. The commander's frantic order for evacuation was swallowed by a new, more terrifying sound, a low, distant thrumming that grew moment by agonizing moment into a deafening roar. On the horizon, against the bruised twilight sky, appeared not one, but dozens of dark silhouettes. Allied bombers. They were not aiming for the tank column anymore. They were coming for the airfield itself. The Germans had been compromised, their secrets were laid bare. And now the retribution was swift and merciless. Chaos erupted. Soldiers, who moments before had been barking orders, now scrambled like terrified rats. Sirens wailed, a mournful, desperate cry against the impending storm. The airfield, a symbol of German might, was about to become its tomb. Amidst the pandemonium, Henri Dubois and his daughter were caught. They were hostages now, seized by desperate soldiers attempting to flee. Henri's heart hammered against his ribs. His plan had worked, yes, but at what cost? He had brought down the wrath of the Allies upon this base, and now he and his innocent child were trapped within its walls. The first bombs hit with a concussive force that shook the very earth. Dust and debris exploded skyward. The escorting soldiers panicked, broke formation, their discipline dissolving under the terrifying onslaught. A wall of fire erupted, separating Henri and his daughter from their captors in a flash of blinding light and heat. One moment they were prisoners, the next they were utterly alone, adrift in a maelstrom of destruction. They ran, not knowing where, only away from the explosions that tore the base apart. The air was thick with smoke, the acrid smell of burning fuel and the metallic tang of fear. Buildings collapsed around them, twisted metal shrieking in protest. Henri clutched his daughter's hand, pulling her through the inferno, shielding her small body with his own. They crawled through rubble, past burning vehicles, the screams of dying men echoing in the infernal symphony of war. They found temporary refuge in a shattered hangar, its roof partially caved in, offering a precarious shelter from the relentless bombing. The ground pulsed with each new impact. The world outside was an apocalypse. Then, through the deafening roar, a sound, faint, almost imperceptible, a familiar sound. The radio. Miraculously, amidst the wreckage, the old set lay partially buried, its casing cracked, but still humming with a faint static. The umbrella, his makeshift antenna, was nowhere to be seen, likely consumed by the flames. But the radio, perhaps by a twist of fate, had endured. Henri looked at his daughter, her face streaked with soot and tears, but her eyes, wide with terror, still held a spark of life. He knew what he had to do. One last message, one last act of defiance. He knelt, his hands trembling slightly, and connected the exposed wires of the radio to a piece of bent metal from the hangar roof, another improvised antenna, born of desperation. He tuned the dial, his fingers remembering the precise movements, coaxing life from the damaged circuits. The static grew stronger. He found a frequency, a whisper of an Allied presence, and began to tap. Slow. Deliberate. Each pulse a testament to survival. Base deactivated. We are alive, thank you. 3 simple sentences, a message of victory, of hope, of gratitude. Miles away, the same Allied operator who had received the earlier cryptic transmission now sat amidst the controlled chaos of the command center. He heard the faint signal, almost drowned out by the reports of success from the bombing raid. He recognized the pattern, the unique cadence. He listened intently, his heart pounding. Base deactivated. We are alive. Thank you. A ghost in the machine. He immediately responded, his voice filled with an unexpected surge of emotion. Unidentified hero, you saved 1,200 men. 1,200 lives, a number that would echo through history, a silent monument to an unknown act of courage. Back at the burning airfield, Hauptmann Klaus Richter watched the destruction. His base, his command, his arrogance, all reduced to ash. He saw the remnants of the warehouse, a smoking ruin, and there, amongst the charred debris, a twisted, skeletal frame, the umbrella, his bet. The $200 he had wagered, now a symbol of his colossal misjudgment. He pulled out the crisp American bills from his wallet, held them for a moment, then let them flutter to the ground, consumed by the swirling smoke. They were meaningless, utterly, tragically meaningless. The SS commander, the man who had ordered Henri's execution, would not escape justice. His incompetence, his failure to secure vital intelligence, led to his swift removal. His career, once promising, was ruined. He vanished into the bureaucratic maw of the collapsing regime, a casualty of his own blindness. Henri and his daughter, amidst the smoldering ruins, found a way out. They slipped past the remaining disoriented German patrols, their figures swallowed by the darkness of the surrounding forest. They walked for days, subsisting on berries and roots, guided by an unwavering hope. Weeks later, emaciated but alive, they were found by a patrol of French troops, liberators pushing east. They told their story, not of grand battles but of quiet defiance, of a broken man and an umbrella. the war ended. Life, slowly, painfully, began to rebuild. Henri Dubois returned to his village, rebuilt his farm, and raised his daughter. He never spoke of his wartime exploits again, choosing instead the quiet anonymity of a simple life. He was a hero unsung, a ghost in the annals of official history. But in London, years later, a small anonymous statue appeared in a quiet corner of a memorial dedicated to resistance radio operators. No name, no grand pronouncement, just a simple, almost overlooked figure. And though it bore no inscription, those who knew the whispers of the war, the true stories of silent courage, understood. The base where Henri had made his stand, now a reclaimed field, bore no physical marker of its violent past. But in the collective memory of those who survived, in the hushed tales passed down through generations, there remained an indelible truth. He had taken silence, the silence of despair, of occupation, of a supposedly dead radio, and he had turned it into signal. A signal that saved lives. A signal that turned the tide. A signal that saved lives. A signal that turned the tide. Henri Dubois. A man whose name would never grace the front pages of newspapers, whose heroism would remain unrecorded in the official histories of the war. He was a ghost, a whisper in the wind, his actions known only to a few and fully understood by even fewer. He returned to his quiet village, rebuilt his farm from the ashes of conflict, and raised his daughter, a living testament to their shared ordeal. He spoke little of the war and never of his daring act. He chose the profound anonymity of a simple life, a life of quiet dignity that sought no accolades, no recognition. He was an unsung hero, one of countless thousands whose individual acts of courage, often born of desperation, collectively shifted the course of human history. Hauptmann Klaus Richter, the arrogant gambler, saw his world crumble around him. The $200 he had so dismissively wagered now lay forgotten, scorched by the fires of his own defeat. His career, once assured, was ruined. The SS commander, blinded by rage and incompetence, was swiftly removed, his fate sealed by the very intelligence he failed to protect. For them, the war ended not with a bang, but with a whimper of disgrace and shattered pride. But for Henri, and for the 1,200 men whose lives he saved, the signal was a beacon. It was a testament to the power of one man's resolve, a silent scream against tyranny, broadcast on a frequency no one expected. History often glorifies the generals, the grand strategists, the men whose names are etched into monuments of stone. But the true fabric of courage, the real turning points, are often woven by the hands of ordinary people. People like Henri. People who, when faced with overwhelming odds, refuse to surrender to despair. They are the invisible transmitters, the silent sentinels, whose ingenuity and sacrifice ensure that the light of hope never truly fades. His story reminds us that heroism isn't always found on a battlefield, celebrated with medals and parades. Sometimes it's found in a dusty warehouse, in the quiet determination of a widowed father, in the improvised wires of a rusty umbrella. It's found in the refusal to be broken, even when everything around you is shattered. It's found in the courage to send a signal when all you hear is silence. This is a true story, one that defies expectation, one that reminds us that the greatest acts of defiance can come from the most unexpected places. It's a story about the profound impact of individual courage, a testament to the fact that even in the darkest of times, one person can make an extraordinary difference. If this incredible tale resonated with you, if it made you rethink what you thought you knew about wartime heroes, please consider giving this video a like. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What other untold stories of defiance do you know? And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into the forgotten corners of history. This was the story of the German pilot who bet $200 the radio was broken, until a widowed father sent enemy location via umbrella. But 30 years later, in a classified vault in Langley, they found the second invention he never told anyone about. Next week, the bomb that was never dropped,